So we talk a lot about movies on the Pulsing Cinema channel. One thing I love as much as movies themselves are books about movies and the movie makers and filmmaking. I remember when I was a young kid and a teenager, I used to go to the local libraries and I would just crawl through the book stacks, looking for anything about movie making, about filmmaking, about the technology. Old books about Super 8 filmmaking and 16mm filmmaking, interviews with filmmakers and directors, and all kinds of film books. And you remember in the high school library, I spent most of my lunches going in there and reading this big book of film. It was this gigantic book that had, like, year by year, it had stuff about the films that came out for that year, so and so, little synopses, little articles. It was a great book. I think sometime I want to actually get that. I think it was called The Story of Film or something like that. And anyway, so I'd like to just talk about that a little more. I want to feature books about films, because I don't think people really talk about that. Because that's before the internet, before you could just pull up a website and get all the information about a film or a filmmaker, their filmography. Where would you go? You'd have to go to a book. You'd have to go to some kind of resource, to some kind of article, to some magazine, some kind of periodical, something, somewhere you could get that information. You couldn't just pull it up on a computer in the 90s when I was growing up. So I love film books. There was this one film book that it's kind of a little more controversial film book, but it's by David Slater and David Kerekes. It's called Killing for Culture. It's a history of death on film. It's subtitled now From Edison to ISIS. This book was, I remember the first time I saw this book in a store. I believe it was Borders. It was in the mid-90s. And I think it was first published in 1994. It was published by this UK publisher, Head Press. And they're kind of, notorious for kind of controversial publications. And then I think there was a second edition released the next year, and I think I got the second edition. That's the one I eventually bought in Orlando, and around, must have been like 2000, the year 2000, because that was one of the first books that I bought. I actually went out with my own, one of the first film books I bought when I went to film school with my own money and everything. I just went out. It was, had nothing to do with filmmaking, but it was about this book is just a story. It's just it's about death on film. It's about some ghoulish stuff. It's everything from Edison, electrocuting the elephant, to the early years of in the 60s and the 70s, the cannibal films, Manson, and all of the the allegations surrounding Charles Manson and snuff filmmaking. There was all these allegations that Manson was making snuff films, that some of the people he murdered were making snuff, and the snuff film, the idea of this organized murdering of people on film for profit. The film Snuff, it was just this really cheap, badly made, cheaply made Manson story shot in South America that this New York distributor, Ed Shackleton, bought and shot an ending where somebody gets murdered, and he kind of promoted the film as, kind of like made in South America where life is cheap, and kind of building up this myth that the person really died in this movie, that there was real death in this movie. And so that kind of began the whole myth of snuff films, and that even kind of filtered into popular culture. There was a Paul Schrader film starring George C. Scott called Hardcore. with Peter Boyle about George C. Scott's daughter runs off and gets involved with these filmmakers who are making snuff films. And then in the 90s, there was the late 90s, there was that film 8mm with Nicolas Cage about people making snuff films. And so this book, and then of course there is the whole Faces of Death, the whole series of Cannibal Holocaust and Mondo films, and then there's the people like Christine Chubbuck, who murdered herself on camera, the newscaster who shot herself on camera in Florida, and the whole people committing suicide on film. Killing for Culture kind of really covers all of this type of stuff, and if what I'm saying is kind of really diverse and scattered, it's because the subject is kind of diverse and scattered. It's the idea of death on film that encompasses documentaries, that encompasses accidental murders, that encompasses made up films, reenactments, dramatized stuff, real life real television, like reality television, like Cops and stuff. And then now, in the early 2000s, it also covers terrorism, ISIS, and the Daniel Pearl and the murders on the video. And so this updated version of Killing for Culture that they've just released, and it's available actually on Amazon Kindle for like $12, very, very inexpensive. I have the original book that I purchased in the 90s somewhere around here, but I saw it on Kindle and I was like, whoa, The updated version has all of the stuff about, Iraq and ISIS and the murders, and then basically it updates kind of what was going on in the late 90s and the early 2000s to where the original book kind of left off, and was just kind of peeking at, reality television like Cops. In the late 80s and early 90s, it was really kind of the height of reality television at that point. But the new edition of Killing for Culture kind of takes it from there, though it doesn't have as cool a cover. I mean, the original Killing for Culture book had this very from like that was some Paulo Caveira document, Mondo movie, I think. I seem to think that was like from like Savage Man or Savage Beast or something, whatever. It probably isn't, but that thing with the head, I mean, whoa! Imagine going into a bookstore and seeing that. Gruesome stuff. There's a whole rundown on Mondo films in the book. I think that's some of the most interesting stuff. Listening to all these, reading all these synopses of these Mondo films. Because there was Mondo Cane. There was the Mondo films were these very exploitative primarily Italian-made documentaries where they would go all over the world and find indigenous people all over the world and watch them, killing things and eating bizarre things, and so. And there's a lot of gray lines as far as ethics and morality with these films, so they kind of got a bad name. And then, of course, Cannibal Holocaust was kind of a commentary on the Mondo movie, but Ruggero Deodato, the director of Cannibal Holocaust himself, got in some deep trouble because Cannibal Holocaust itself kind of had some gray moral lines in the fact that it portrayed real killing. It killed some real animals just for the film, like a muskrat was murdered, and then a pig and some other stuff. So it really tainted the filmmaker, tainted the director's career. Really, it tainted Deodato's career. I think it could have been a lot bigger if that whole scandal hadn't come about. It was just a very strong movie, and the fact that it kind of had that real animal death kicked it over and took it into a very controversial area. So This film, I mean, this book, I can think of it. It would be great if you could make a film out of Killing for Culture, because that would be interesting. The book again updates, like the book had this. The original printing of this book had this long section on Last House on Dead End Street, and at that point, nobody really knew who made Last House on Dead End Street, and now we know is this guy Roger Watkins. And there's another great head press book about the making of Last House on Dead End Street. But this book goes into that, and then the update tells you, oh, okay, this was what was really going on. Last House on Dead End Street was like, it's this filmmaker who gets, this Manson-esque filmmaker who gets out of prison and starts killing people and filming it, and then he eventually kills his producer and films it, and it's this really weird, low budget, 16 millimeter, very, very weird, freaky movie. It's freaky when you watch on DVD, but when you watch on this fifth generation VHS, fifth generation VHS, it is just, it's just a weird movie. There's a scene with naked woman and hoofs, and it's just freak out, like strange, like somebody who was on a lot of drugs, and the director admits to being on a lot of drugs during the film, making the film. It's something. It's weird. It's weird, and again, that's covered in this. A lot of obscure stuff. A lot of obscure Brazilian films are covered in this book. See, my impression of Brazil from Killing for Culture and some other stuff I've seen is that Brazil didn't give a fuck. The Brazilian film industry, I mean, if you know it by like Brazilian horror by like Coffin Joe and that shit, it's way crazier than that. I mean, it seems like the Brazilian there's some weird, wild films. So I think if you're interested in world film, the underground stuff, the grindhouse stuff, a little more of the kind of the highways and byways, and a little more of the weirder, sleazier stuff, serial killer stuff, this type of material, I think Killing for Culture is something you might want to check out. It's an interesting book. It's not necessarily a totally coherent work in this, because it's just covering so much. It's covering everything from R. Bud Dwyer killing himself and being on television, to Manson, to the whole history of Mondo films. I mean, any one of these subjects could comprise a book just unto themselves. And Killing for Culture is kind of a slim volume. It's not this gigantic, voluminous tome. It's a really compact volume, but it's still it's just a wealth of information. There's so many like obscure movies that are to this day still kind of obscure that are covered in the book, and it's great to have it on Kindle so you can do a search, or you think, oh, where's the book I'm thinking about, or do a search for like Taxi Driver ripoff, you can do searches inside the book. That's what really, I like the layout of the physical book. I think the new version and then the original version, the print version to me is always the best, but the digital version, there is a little bit of an ease of use and in expense. It's only like $12, I think, on the Amazon store. So it's definitely worth a check. Definitely, if you love interesting books about this type of movie, Killing for Culture is definitely right up your alley. Something you should check out.